Recording in progress.
Standby OBB in 3, 2, 1, go.
Selamat malam Bapak dan Ibu, selamat bergabung dalam sesi bincang istimewa malam ini dengan tema Reporting the Energy Transition, How Energy Makes Headlines in Indonesian Media, atau meliput transisi energi, bagaimana energi menjadi tajuk utama di media Indonesia.
The main headline in Indonesian media. My name is Norman Harsono, Deputy Editor from the Jakarta Post that will act as the moderator for the next 2 hours. This session is part of the Indonesia Energy Transition Dialogue 2021 as the annual event that organized by Institute of Essential Reform. So this year, IETD would like to discuss with you the role of media, and this session is presented by Case Project with the objective to build public discourses about the energy transition in the Southeast Asia region, including Indonesia, Filipina, Thailand, and Vietnam. With us, we have a resource person with extensive knowledge. They have from different background, press, researcher, and allow me to introduce one by one. From katadata.co.id, Mas Yura Syahruzal, Chief Editor katadata.co.id, Mas Revolusi Riza Sulverdi, Deputy Chief Editor CNN TV. Good evening, Mas Norman. Mas Aris Prasetyo, journalist from Kompas. Good evening. Hello, Mas Norman. Good evening, everyone. Teni Christiana, researcher in International Council on Clean Transportation, or ICCT. Good evening, ma'am. Good evening. And Desi Ayu Pirmasari, journalist and currently researcher in Generate or Gender, Generation and Climate Change. Good evening. Good evening, Norman. And this discussion will have a Q&A format. I will deliver several questions that have been prepared for each of the speaker for the next 50 minutes, and we will have Q&A session with the audience for the next 30 minutes, and there will be closing statement from each participant for the next 10 minutes. During the discussion, we would like to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to deliver questions, opinion through the chat column, both from the YouTube channel or from the Zoom platform. So without further ado, let's start with the first question. The first question intended to the colleague of journalist Yura, Revo, and Apo, and also Daisy, who once worked in Bloomberg TV and TV1. If you would like to add, what is the position of about the urgency and transition, energy transition, about the climate change mitigation strategy? So how you respond to the role of fossil industry in this transition period, Yura? Okay, thank you so much, Norman. Once again, good evening for those who watching this event. I'm a bit nervous because it's like a task because there's a question that I need to answer. This is a simple question, but I will try to be brief. So I'm very happy to be invited in this forum because I can share what Data Newsroom is doing that I led since 2015. So in 2015, I started in Katadata. Now, with regard to this energy transition in Katadata, previously around 2016, 2017, one of our focus of our coverage is energy, oil and gas, but mostly focus on fossil energy, that sourcing from fossil energy. But in the last 2 years, the energy in Katadata Newsroom So there are many different focus like new renewable energy and so on and so forth. But the movement in the world and Indonesia is moving to that direction. So that is why in Kata Data, over time, we have bigger portion for energy transition, new energy, renewable energy until it become one of the section in Kata Data website. We call it new energy as one of the sub channels. So in short, this is how Kata Data address the energy topic. So Revo, a good evening, everyone. So if we talk about energy transition and then if we talk about new and renewable energy and so on and so forth, it has different naming, like also green energy. So we are focusing in the environment sector, and what interesting is the awareness of community to the environment is increasing, like plastic diet movement. But over time, the environment issues, including the new renewable energy issue or the energy transition issue, becoming um, very interesting. And when CNN Indonesia, so we on air for the first time in 2015, August 17, 2015. So during that first on air, we have live report from different location, and even at that time, we even have a live from Puncak Jaya. So at that time, our colleague joined the expedition organized by different institution, and one of the reason is to see how how much decrease the ice cap there. And then we joined the meteorological agency to have a research in the same place in the tip of the Puncak Jaya. When we talk about climate change, then it's also important to talk about energy, because one of the most related topic and most urgent is about energy, climate change and energy. It has a high concern there. But when we talk about TV media seems have a lot of slot time, but it's not the case because we are limited by time. And we have so many issue now. In the recent years, environment issue become quite popular, quite high, and but now it's like back and forth with other issue. Like currently we have COVID-19. COVID-19 become the main headline, even though we are not forgetting other issue. Like last night when Depok was hit by a strong wind and heavy rain, one that we noticed that we link is about climate change issue, and that will lead to energy issue because one of the contributor of carbon issue is energy. So that's my response. So CNN start off from the environment issue. Yes, because we cannot undermine that. So we need to transition to clean energy, to new and renewable energy, because one of the contributors, one of the contribution, one of the driver of climate change is from that aspect, from the fossil fuel. Okay, thank you so much. Apple? Yes, thank you so much, Norman. Now, if you asked the position or compass position, the media stance or position is reflected from a column that we call headline title. So our position in terms of there are two columns in that section. The plan title, if I can call it, So first, to respond to the top is to respond the national issue, and the bottom to respond the international issue. So those are the position in certain topics. So if you ask the Compass position for climate change and energy transition, so in that same section, in that same column, we are actually talking about transition energy. The title is to prevent Earth to become warmer. So we're not intentionally do that, but it happened naturally. And allow me to share quantitatively. In the Compass Media R&D division, if we click the keyword climate change, ever since the signing of Paris Agreement in 2015, from January 1st, 2016 up until now, so if you type climate change, there will be thousands of articles from Compass. So every year, that means we produce around 444 articles. Now, before the Paris Agreement signed in 2010 until 2015, there was around 3,928 articles. So it's more after the signing of Paris Agreement. But maybe because it's balance with COVID. If you type COVID, there is 18,000 articles since January 1st, 2020. So it's not, it doesn't mean that we don't concern about the climate change issue or energy transition issue, but yeah. Now, at the end of 2020 and in the beginning of 2021, I led a special coverage about energy transition in several places in Indonesia, and this is a cooperation with international organization that has focus in climate change from institution from Europe. So there are articles and books about it as well. And since tomorrow, I will lead the same project but with different partner. If I can say it, we call it the archipelagic energy exploration or Jelajah Energi Nusantara. So since tomorrow we'll see the energy transition issue in different islands, major islands in Indonesia, and it involves around 30 to 40 people. So since tomorrow, starting tomorrow, we will go to the ground, and our position is clear. Climate change must be responded, and we need to have a real action to respond it. Thank you so much. Maybe from Desi, for those who have worked in Bloomberg TV and TV1, maybe you can share a little bit about the media stance. With regard to media stance, I think I am no longer relevant to give comment because I have left the media. So since 2015, I never haven't, I don't work in there anymore. But there are several things that I would like to share about the climate change issue. And the first one, so in general, that climate change, the impact is not proportional, and the most affected group are those who have the least contribution to the destruction itself, but they are severely affected because they are the vulnerable group, marginal group, but their voices are unheard. That's number one. And second, we can claim that we are committed to climate change, to energy transformation, or whatever. But for me, these commitments become meaningless if we don't change our own behavior. For example, in our home, we set our air conditioner 18 degrees, but we use blanket. Now, in Western, during winter, and they put the heater maximum, but they only wear thin clothes. Or in Indonesia, the habit. So even though you are using EV, electric vehicle, or even all the energy in Indonesia use renewable energy, but when you go to the small shop, which is only less than 1 kilometer, and you use your own vehicle, that means the commitment is just as much as only speaking. And that's second. And third, when we talk about climate change issue and energy transformation, often it's only happen in the middle upper class issue. But once again, climate change, the effect felt the most by the marginal group that often didn't involve in the energy transformation domain and in climate change discussion. but often the policymaker or in our side as a researcher or from media, we often use something we call speaking on their behalf. So it seems that we're talking on behalf of them. This is something that, in my opinion, that we need to pay attention when we talk about climate change. I think that will be all from my side. Thank you so much, Desti. So I am requesting by the committee to share the Jakarta Post position. Well, no one asking, but I need to ask. Okay. So the same with the rest. Our stance reflected from the news that we publish. With regard to Jakarta Post, so in brief, our position, we support energy transition, including the growth of the renewable energy industry. Maybe, to be exact, Indonesia need to meet their commitment in the Paris Agreement, the National Energy Plan, and so on and so forth. But it seems difficult to achieve those targets. So that would be all from my side. Okay, thank you so much for your responses. So we're now entering the second question. This question is intended to all the speaker, to the panel. How do you see the coverage of energy transition, including the energy industry, by the mass media in Indonesia? And as a comparison, how do you see how the government and the business sector, the private sector, frame this issue? So maybe I will start with Yura. Okay, thank you so much. The question is related to how media see the energy transition issue coverage. So we have discussed concern from each of the media, at least from each of us. So the concern towards climate change and energy transition, it exists. There is that concern. And the newsroom policy itself is similar. But then, from the way I see it, it's not real. The magnitude is not really high when it reached the public domain. Because to be honest, Kata Data as an online media, besides making content for the public interest and have a good quality, but at the end, it will talk about how many and how big the traffic is, how many people that read. And Daisy also mentioned the same thing, that this issue is an issue that, if I can say, elitist, but the biggest impact felt by the marginalized group, by the bottom community. But they don't realize. And the theme about energy transition, climate change, is not appealing for the broader public. So media will still include that content, but with the risk, least readers, not so much traffic. But for myself, that's okay, because this is a transition from something that old, transition into something new, and it takes time to process, and it takes time as well. And in my opinion, so I don't want to answer all of the question, but second, in my opinion, the language or the words or the how do I say it? You know, to say energy transition, new energy, green energy, it's not consistent yet. Therefore, the public perception quite confusing. Maybe all of the stakeholders who are concerned with energy transition must create terms or languages that are easier to understand, simpler, that we all can use, so that the public can be educated properly. So maybe we call it good energy, because there are many non-Indonesian terms in climate change and in transition and energy transition. And one more thing, from the government side, maybe there are several things that I would like to mention, that when we talk about policy or commitment from the government, there are several things that we can highlight. But I think from the aspect of government commitment to push the energy transition is still half-heartedly. So is there any question related to that? Maybe the next question, because my response is a bit long talking about that. Okay, go ahead, Rifo. But to continue what Daisy said, so we have a joke in our newsroom whether we believe climate change exists. This is a joke, so my apologies for saying this joke. So this is like religion. In Indonesia, we have Islam, Christian, and for those who are Muslim, some practicing, some don't. But whether they believe, yeah, they believe, but they're not consistent in implementing it. So some Muslim have the complete practice, some just half practicing, and the same with Christian. Maybe some go to church, some don't. So when we being asked, do we believe to climate change? Do our newsroom believe in climate change? Yes, we believe, but in terms of implementation, it's different. Now in media, so maybe this is the cost, the reason. So I agree to what Yura said. So this issue is an elite issue. The broader community not all see this as an important issue. So in online, if I use online terms, the click is not too high. In TV, the rating is not too high. Now in Indonesia, the media depend to advertisement. But subscribers is not so many. Like CNN Indonesia, their life depend on advertisement. So if they depend their life in advertisement, so the newsroom must balance between idealism and pragmatism. If we make idealism content but no one read, no one watch, then there will be no advertisement and we cannot survive. But if we make a content that is so, even if we have a high traffic content that not necessarily have many advertisement, like horror program, it has high rating but there is no advertisement, because advertisement, they don't want to be associated with the content, they don't want to associated with the criminal content, and that's where we need to have balance. So we need to be smart. Now the problem is, this is our work to educate the audience that this is an important issue, so they read. And now there is a tendency, several major corporations, several major companies start to perform campaign with regard to energy transition, with regard to fight against plastic and reducing plastic waste. So there are awareness heading that way. What left? Because again, because well, for subscribers, they have revenue outside advertisement. But yeah, this is the problem that the media is facing. So people still see the current issue. Now, in environment context, like what happened yesterday in Depok, there's a heavy rain and many damage happened. And because proximity-wise is close and many readers, and we need to acknowledge that the biggest so what affected by the climate is people who live in the coastal area, and people who live in coastal area are fishermen. That economic class is not the consumer of media. So there are many things that we can discuss with regard to the government. So we'll discuss this further, but at least the same government has commitment, build several and renewable energy power plant. In Sulawesi, they built wind farm. In Kupang, NTT, they have a big solar panel. But in the other side, forest degradation still happen. So we believe the government has that commitment, but the application and the implementation that we need to discuss further. So that is my take.
If we're talking about media, it is the same story. So I would like to talk about the government's framing. Let's say we produce coal in our midterm national development plan in the first period of Mr. Jokowi. It is mentioned that in 2009 is 400 tons in the production will continue to that, and apparently it is more than that. So that's in the RUEN, or in the policy of the national energy. It is also mentioned 23% of the energy mix in Indonesia comes from new and renewable energy in 2025. So the position of 2020 is 10 point something percent. It means that within 5 years, we have to double up. On the other hand, why I said that it is not consistent, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry issued regulation that the gasoline that can be used in Indonesia as per 2017 is around 91, but now around 88 can be sold unless in Java, Pertamina has not sold it yet. So there is an inconsistency between regulation and implementation in the field. But behind that, it is not as simple as we see, because there is a story behind that. For example, coal. We have already locked 400 million in 2019 in our midterm national development plan, but it becomes 1 million ton. There is an improvement of 50%. So in 2019, we had a big political event. And at that time, the price of the coal was relatively high, 80 until 90 US dollars per ton. There is money coming in the pipe, and there is a big event. So this is sexy killers, because the politic is financed by the coal. And there is the problem of economic growth, and also the multiplying effect in the surrounding the mining. If there is a price temptation, because at that time, the Indonesia's balance sheet is supported by the coal and CPO. Both prices were increasing. There were super cycles of the commodity. So, okay, we lock it in this figure, and apparently it is breached. So the framing is inconsistent. Something like that, ma'am, sir. Thank you, Mr. Afo. Let's move to Ibu Teni. To respond the first question about how's the current issue covered by the media, as the observer, this is the way I see it. If we talk about climate change and clean energy, so we can see the coverage in the news. We can find that the focus is just the same, and it is still in the global arena. For example, Mr. President Joe Biden said that Jakarta will be drawn in the next year. In the national level, what I found is that the focus of the story is still in the perspective given by the government and business actors. For example, state-owned enterprises, Pertamina, for example, install the gas station or install the vapor fuel power plant, and how the government framed this. Actually, the government has already had a strong commitment to deal with the climate change. For example, we can see that there is the target of net zero emission in 2060, and there is a talk about carbon tax, and there is also talk about carbon trading. If we see this is actually something that focus to finance, while what about the focus to the environment itself? In terms of the environment, we can see that Ministry of Forestry has already tried to deal forest fire, and they are trying to reduce the forest fire itself. For clean energy, the government has already boosted new energy. For example, recently there is a coding about state-owned enterprises for geothermal, and there is also an effort to develop electric vehicle. All of this are aligned. All of this aligned with Paris Agreement. However, from our side, we see that the work that the government does is good. The commitment is good. But there are other matters that can be encouraged for, in terms of the environment. As it was mentioned, the government is still able to develop biofuel. However, there is a critics that about there will be an opening of new land. So from the environment side, we can prevent that. But maybe we can use the waste that already exists for biofuel. Biofuel can be developed from the waste oil, for example. If we cannot do it from the residue, probably we can do it from the waste of the corn, for example. So there is another way to care for environment that can be done by the government. Thank you, ma'am. Just a little bit follow up. Tenny, probably you can give an example, some kind of reportage from the government's perspective and business actor. Which media? Can I say a brand? For example, there are medias who are online, and the concern is more to the environment. For example, biothermal in Indonesia, there are some medias in Indonesia like that. I don't mind if we have to mention the brand. Please go ahead if you want to mention the brand. Media is open. Thank you, Tenny and Daisy. You also mentioned about some news coverage that doesn't voice the poor. So how do you see the coverage of media about energy and climate change issue? I also take note, there are 3 points. First, if we talk about framing, we talk about dominant narration. The closest one, IPTC has just released the latest report about climate change. When I Google it about news in Indonesia, the narration that is used still follows the global dominant narration. In academic, it is produced by the global north or the Western country. I personally would like to see in the future there will be local values that is connected. Like IPC reports that the increase of the Earth heat is 1.5 degrees. But if we change the air condition, we cannot feel that, right? So because people do not know what is the impact of 1.5 Celsius degree, we have to simplify the research narration. So 1.5 degrees Celsius means that the ice in the North Pole will melt, and it will go to the cities like in Jakarta. So that's why Jakarta can be drawn. So it is the impact of the climate change itself, because at the end, I see that all the solution from the West can be applied in countries like Indonesia. So if we have the IPCC report, I also pay attention to the comments from the local researchers who deal with that field. So our weakness as a researcher, we use some words that cannot be easily understood. I have mentioned about that. Therefore, we would like to cooperate with media because media understands the language. I think media is still a powerful channel to lead public opinion and to develop the public awareness in regards to this matter. our language can be delivered to media, and media can simplify the language so public can understand. So there is communication between those three parties: researchers, media, and public, who are impacted by the climate change issue. Number three, I would like to follow up the statement from Ibu Tani about transition, about energy transition. Let's say like this: I want to see a news is more critical towards phenomenon, especially a government policy. When the government has a commitment, okay, we would like to have zero emission 2060, 2050, but if there is still a lot of coal piled up, and which can go for about 50 years from now, we have to question where are we going to do with that, or if there is a plan of the if there is a plan of the government to build a power plant that is based in coal. So what we have to remember, again, those who are impacted most are those who are marginalized. So in my opinion, it is important to bring the inclusion issue. So if we talk about new or renewable energy, either in Bandung or in other cities in Indonesia, so we do not focus on the comments. For example, the government or state-owned enterprises, not only for them, but what is the impact for the surrounding community? So the development, the energy company can contribute to the local community, because maybe the workers should be local people. Because when we talk about climate change, we talk about sustainability. Sustainable means that we respect the past to finance the future. So what we do now is not only for our interest. We are a researcher. As a media, we have just come and go whenever we want to go. We can cover everywhere. And then, but the people who live in a place, those who live in a place, they cannot go anywhere. So it is necessary to include their voices, and whether the development of something can be impacted to the climate change. Thank you, Daisy. Is there any response from other participants? Yes, the suggestion from Penny and Daisy, more or less, in kata data, this is what happens. So the discourse about energy transition is still driven by the policy of the government and also by private sector. However, I think that indeed it is necessary to create a narration, or perhaps conditions in the field from another side, especially from our fellow researchers. So the research that includes data response, maybe it can become a narration, comparison narration from the discourse issued by the government or private sector. Daisy also said that we need that the result of the researcher can be amplified to the media. I think this is very important. So we are in the same shoes. So we should have had the value in order for us to publish it. So Daisy is a former journalist. So the language of the researcher can be converted into popular language. Maybe it is not difficult for you. In Kata Data, we provide rooms for our colleagues, the writers from outside, in order for them to deliver the result of their research or their opinion. And number two, collaboration. It is natural in the current media condition. So we have media, we have researcher, and we have educational institution, NGO. we together create a journalism work. So journalist has the power from the side of the coverage reportage and writing, and then researcher is very strong in terms of methodology of the research, and we can also provide facilitation for government and private sector, so it can be a comprehensive coverage. So that's my response. I'm very open to do that. Thank you, Mas Iram. Mas Revo or another panelist would like to respond? Indonesian media, there is a few of them is specified. So not many not many media that focus on environment. Maybe one of them is equatorial. But if we talk about mainstream media, Kata Data, Tempo, Jakarta Post, Kompas, this is a generic media. Well, our country is a country with a lot of problems. The problems have never finished. Let's talk from 2019. We talk about a general election, and we had Corruption Eradication Commission bill of draft, and then we talk about omnibus law afterwards, or job creation law, and now we have also other issues. So we have a lot of problems in this country. Environment is one of the existing problems. So the debate about this issue becomes very dynamic. Which one that we need to bring about? Environment issue, it includes the energy transition. We do not forget about that. In CNN, we also bring about this issue. So we are not talking about Jakarta that will be drawn, but we talk about the coastal area of Java also. Not only about Joe Biden, but you can Google that in our website. So we make in-depth coverage for about 30 minutes about coastal of Java. But again, Indonesia has too many problems, and we have to face the reality every day. So environment is just one of them. So this is not apple to apple. Thank you. Especially COVID news. Do you have any response? I'd like to concentrate on the statements from Tenny and Daisy. So how can we make the climate change issue not becoming an exclusive issue? Daisy mentioned that our media, including Kompas, does not translate the journal terminologies to become popular language. My apology, my friends from IESR. We do campaign about climate change, about energy transition, but we use terminologies which are not understood by common people. For example, if we talk about global warming, why don't we use Indonesian version of global warming? Global warming in the Lawu slope, what is the impact? Why it is still cold? What is the connection between the North Pole that will melt with us who lives in the equator? So we have to do it in the more integrated manner. So it is not becoming an exclusive issue. We mentioned also the impact of the climate change. It is, you mentioned about marginalized people, but I see that everybody is impacted. Either they are marginalized or not, but the response is different because it's a problem of resources. The able group that has a lot of resources, if they feel hot, then they will just switch on the AC. If they are flooded, then they will move to their house in the peak, for example. So because everybody feels the impact, because this is the common issue. This is the issue of the public. It's not an issue of a certain party. So the challenge of the media is how to create that issue with a simple language. For me, it is about literacy about climate change, how we understand about on how to respond climate change, and how to anticipate the impact of the climate change, but we do not have literacy about the climate change itself. Okay, we do have literature. Our fellow NGO, but they use journal language, the researchers' language. There is a distance between us, between researchers and common people, the public. So there is a distance. What is the distance? Communication. It is simple. Now I'm talking now I'm talking myself. Why we need to alienate it? Why do we need to make everything to be written in English? We talk about global warming because we have the translation in Indonesian. Carbon emission, we have the Indonesian translation for that. They say 1.5 degrees Celsius. The target to reduce emission for 30 tons of CO2. Yes, until now, I don't know 30 tons of CO2. I cannot, even the gas is not visible. But if it is a physical goods, then it's probably 2 bags. So even the National Energy Council said, I don't know how to calculate that. They don't even know about that. So carbon trading, we don't know how to measure that 30 million tons of CO2. The gas is not feasible. So I agree. There is a distance between scientists and public. And it is a matter of communication and literacy. Literacy is the responsibility of media, one of the responsibilities of the media. That's my answer. Thank you. Eko. Continue. It is still about traffic, rating, fuel. So this becomes a heavy word for media right now. How do you see the demand about news about energy transition and EBT in Indonesia? You also mentioned that there is a column about green economy. What about the movement? What is the demand for such news? To be honest, the contents relating to energy transition or sustainability because the world is moving to that way and it has become a concern and it has become a movement, let alone that Indonesia will join, I forgot which COP number something. I don't understand about that. So Madam Minister of Finance become the lead minister for green finance. There's a lot of terminologies about that. So everything moves to that direction. Therefore, media will definitely capture all the issue and go to that direction. While the problem that it is not accepted by the public in general, then it is okay. So we publish news about COVID and COP, but this is media's job to make contents relating to energy transition. And I really understand about energy transition. It takes time in order for that topic to be accepted by the community. If we would like to televise news about environment, visually it will be interesting. For example, CN Indonesia brought the news about the melting of the ice in Kartens Peak. So there is a shrinking of the ice. Visually, it will be interesting because there is an action and there is a picture that is rarely seen by people. And we also televised the coastal north of Java. Visually, it is interesting. Starting from the fisherman's village and others. So in Pekalongan, for example, there is the waste in the river has caused the river to become purple, and visually it is attractive or it is interesting. So the job of the media is to make something complicated to become something that matters for the public. That's the challenge. But if we would like to make something matters to the public, we cannot talk about carbon trading. Our CNN went to Jambi and went to Kalimantan talking about carbon trading. So do they know about carbon trading? How to exchange carbon? Why it can be a money? What can we exchange it with money? It's a commodity. How should we do that? How come we can do that? So in Jambi, in a village in Jambi, they receive benefit from safeguarding the forest. That's what carbon trading is all about. So the homework is that the coverage should matters for other people. So we have to see the people on the ground. So if we talk about issues, why it becomes elite issue if we talk about energy transition or complicated issues for about the reduction of fossil fuel to new and renewable energy, carbon emission, etc. I think people in general do not care, I think. So mostly, let's say CN Indonesia. CN Indonesia is relatively unique because the market is in PTV, in IndiHome and others, in pay TV. So the market is middle and upper class. But when CN Indonesia has to serve Trans TV's audience or viewers, because they're supplied by CNN Indonesia and Trans 7, the topic will be different. The topic will be different because the niche market is different. So we should not talk about something complicated to the people in the lower class. So that becomes a challenge for us. I give you an example. When we have to serve viewers who have different level of different social level, like soccer in Trans 7 in our sister company, they will look at the action when people kick the ball until it reached the goal. But in CNN TV, what they see is the analysis of the play of the game. So if the market is the elite, then we can talk about that. But if we talk about public in general, then the language should be adjusted. So how to make the context down to earth, how to use the language that can be understood by the people, because we use the journal language. Mas Gatot? I have short memory problem. Can you repeat the question again? What is the demand of the news for EBT, energy transition, for the recent years? Is it internally or externally? Internally, yeah. In our media, there is a division of desk. I'm in economy and business desk, specifically in energy. And there is also a humanity desk, like social, culture, and education. It's sometimes overlapped between environmental specialists and energy specialists, because energy and environment is overlap. If we talk about demand, it is the decision of the newsroom or the initiative of the journalists. I'll give you an example. Let's say we are going to have COP in Scotland the 1st November. Then we will welcome that with the news about energy transition in Indonesia. So this is what we are doing. So the request is being adjusted with is actual in the public or what becomes attention in the public. When Donald Trump said climate change is hoax, we respond that. When Biden said America is back, they enter to Paris Agreement, then we respond to that. That's the actual one, naturally actual. For example, disaster hydrometeorology, we do a special coverage in Compass investigation desk to cover about cities that will be drawn. It becomes the headline in for several days. So what happened outside there? So how we can respond to something that will be coming? It is something that we write. Thank you. So we have the green news in the top 10 news, either palm oil, forestry. So it's very strong, at least for the Jakarta Post. I just would like to add, usually the issue that we will bring will be considered problematic or not. Is it close to the daily life of the public? So the ice pole will melt. What is the business with Indonesia who lives for Indonesian people who lives in the equator? The impact is serious, but we live far away from the pole, except if we live in the Greenland. So that one factor that makes us think. For example, is something that happens on the television, economic. For criminal and sports, when I studied, so the page that I open in the newspaper is sports. I never open economic page. Now I'm in economic desk.
So we only have a few minutes left, so we will move to the Q&A with the audience. So I'm just gonna read the questions from ISR. Which energy transition aspect that suitable for each the newsroom? This is quite specific with regard to energy transition. So the popular aspect, so from fossil, non-new energy, and to renewable energy. So what sexy is coal. So from the non-tax set revenue, coal contribute 80%, and the multiplier effect economically and the supply chain from upstream to downstream is so huge. Coal is still dominant in my place. has 60 to 65% in our electricity mix. That's number one. With regard to impact, what the impact for state, for company, for the government, for public. For example, Europe will apply carbon restriction from 2022 as a trial and fully in 2024. So every product entering Europe, they will check the carbon print of each product, and Europe will apply certain requirements. If it's exceeds certain indicator, they will not allow to enter. But even if they allow, they will be imposed with high fees. Now, that's from business perspective, and from the politically, if the product has a huge carbon print, then it can be banned, can be prevented. So the impact in terms of trade politically always there. So that will have big attention. So if I can share to answer Chitra's question, so my experience when I become energy reporter, so policy always draw many attention, and this answer Tenny and Daisy, because if not, our energy industry is very strictly regulated by our country. If there is a change of policy, then there will be huge impact to the industry and will draw public attention from the private sector, public researcher, and so on and so forth. So the second question, so the marginal group, the vulnerable group, will be affected the most by climate change. And so second question, they are affected the most, but they cannot follow the news because of their economic weakness to follow the media. So how the knowledge can reach those marginal groups? So more or less something like that the question is. So I think this should be answered by Daisy, I think, that have raised the issue about the marginal group. So how the marginal group can access the needed information about the climate change impact to them. So sometimes they have limited access to media. So somehow it's true. So sometimes they don't care, let alone reading the media. Even to buy food, it's difficult. So that's the role of the researcher. Our objective when we perform research, we would like to touch the marginal group, not only poor, but also the women's group and the LGBTQ, because during disaster, they are excluded from the aid and assistance. Then, and marginal group has different category. So we, from the research as perspective, that's what we do. We try to approach them. In other side, we hope there are other parties that work together to help to approach them, to educate, quoting the term that colleague from the studio is using. So I hope people from NGO, friends from NGO, and other researcher can also contribute. So our hope is, and also hope imposed to us, when we conduct research or when we conduct coverage, we should not treat the marginal group only as the research object, but treat them as human being, as equal, that would like to have fresh air, would like to live side by side with the nature. Because when, let's say, there's a disaster struck, the one who affected the most are the poor group, because sometimes often their house are not permanent hosts, it doesn't mean that other group will not be affected, but they are the affected the most. So when there are many regulations developed by Western countries for climate change, but the most affected countries are the country uh, in Caribbean islands like Maldives or like Indonesia that has many coastal area, and there are many cities in Indonesia that below the sea surface level. So people ask why it hasn't sink when it located below sea surface level. So this is the language that we need to simplify it. So I myself as a researcher, I really want to continue this communication with the media so that we can come up with so that our language can reach the media and the media can convey to the public with easy to understand terms so climate change no longer become an elite issue. And that will be from my side. So there is also a question to Desi, how you observe other media in the Southeast Asia region. Other media in Southeast Asia region, well, there are several media that affiliated with media from the Western. So let's say there is Bangkok Post, Manila Post. So there are many media in Southeast Asia region that is elite. So when talk about energy transition and so on and so forth, the community being interviewed are the senior government officials. It's very rare for me when we talk about energy issue, uh, development of solar panel in certain area. The one that being interviewed are the surrounding communities. How they see, it's very rare. What I often see, the one being interviewed is the senior government officials. While in my opinion, the voices of surrounding communities are very important, not only to raise their awareness, but to explore their experience with this issue. So what message coming from them can fit into the policymaker on the top. Thank you so much. I actually have question to Tenny, and Tenny can provide insights how you see news coverage about energy transition, climate change in other countries in Southeast Asia region. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So I browse starting from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, or even media in Japan. So there are two focus. Now first, with regard to energy, there are many that still focus on economy or financial related. So we can see there are several issues that link with investment in coal or like the development of coal power plant, and there are issues about coal with regard to palm oil and electric vehicle, and still dominated by oil and gas topic. And there are several small portion for renewable energy like solar panel. While for climate change issue, it's still linked with disaster. It's still linked with natural disaster, and the same with what Desi said. There are still many news or articles that still focus from the government perspective, that focus on government effort, what the government is doing to fulfill their international commitment, like to meet the Paris Agreement. So it's still very limited. So it's not only happened in Indonesia but also in other countries. That's how several topic link to another topic. Next from Uli Mahardika. This is a question open to all panelists. To what extent media perform investigation if there is a agenda setting from the fossil energy industry to discredit renewable energy? So have you ever read or watch this kind of issue? this is because this is what happened behind the newsroom. So of course, still with fossil energy, and in other side there's renewable energy. So it's like, you know, tug of war. So when media in the coverage when performing investigation about agenda setting, of course there will be agenda setting by by party outside the media or the media itself. They will agenda setting, but as mentioned before, like in newsroom and especially friends that present here is decision maker to direct the news about the energy transition and how it is compared. We will perform coverage that follows journalist standard. It involve reporting, research, and engaging the researchers to provide some different perspective about the narrative coming from the other side. Okay, thank you so much, Yura. So that I think that answer close our Q&A session tonight. So my apologies if there are questions that hasn't been answered. We have discussed for more than 1 hour to exchange for the exchanges. Now we are entering the last session, which is the closing statement session. We have 10 minutes left, where each of the speaker has 2 minutes to deliver the closing statement. So make this an opportunity to summarize what we have discussed in the last 1 hour. So we will start from the most senior. Oh, not from the most senior. So maybe from Apo, I guess. Yes, thank you. Actually, we have discussed this. So as a closing remarks, there are two things. There are two keywords. So in my previous writings, I often use leadership and political will, but it turns out it's not enough. So after I read, I observed there are two important terms, which are literacy and collaboration. Literacy, like mentioned by Desi, how how we can respond to something if we don't understand. So literacy has relation with the media's role, how to place an issue, how to see an issue, and how to share information in a simple way. That's what literacy means. And second is collaboration. We talk about climate change, we talk about energy transition. To respond in it, even a big country cannot do it alone. So all human being must work together, from the elite until grassroots. They must work together, because climate change not only happen in certain territory, because that is why the Paris Agreement signed by 196 countries, not only by 1 or 2 countries. Then who will be the literacy target? So I'm interested to answer the question from the audience, from Parita Ahart. This is a very interesting question. So it doesn't mean grassroots doesn't receive information. No, they are doing well. I think the literacy that we need to provide is the elite group. So traditionally, local wisdom, for example, in certain tribe a few years ago, I entered the Halmahera forest. It's a nomad, so they have a unique traditional. So every if getting married, he need to plant 10 trees. So if it's a boy, they need to plant 20 trees. If it's girl, 10 trees. It's a unique local wisdom. They don't read newspaper. They are nomad. Why the literacy need to provide to elite? Because elite is the decision maker. How coal is exploited, how land is changed. It's it's the conspiracy or the involvement between the elite and the government. I think the most urgent literacy need to be provided is to the elite group, because the grassroots, they are wise already, even though they are not touched by literacy. So my apologies if I'm taking too long, but thank you so much, Apo. So Revo? climate change issue exists, visible, but often far away. Close, but far away. So it is our responsibility to make this issue matter to us. So flash flood happen more often in terms of duration, frequency. It's increasing in several places. There are many coastal areas that sunk, and it's felt. What left is how to make this as a collective, as a common issue that we need to fight together, including energy transition. Collaboration is key, and how to make it simple, how to use simple language. So when we talk to younger generation, the millennials or zillennials, they are more exposed to information and they are more open-minded. 2 weeks ago, we organized a campaign related to environment by making a strip comic competition, many joining, and surprisingly, not only participants from big cities but also small cities across Indonesia, meaning awareness and campaign is effective. But what left is how we make the policymaker, the stakeholders are equally aware. So it's not only a jargon, it's not only becoming a program that's signed, but commitment wise, it's still far from what we expect. And this is our responsibility. Thank you so much, Revo. Back again to Yura. Closing statement. This is a discussion that will still continue, but nonetheless, I would like to provide the standpoint of media, especially from my side. So we have discussed, because media is the fastest and the closest to receive information, especially from different parties, then automatically media will have concern and will support the energy transition movement and how to address climate change. That's number one. And number two, I would like to respond to the previous comment. It is true, I agree that actually what media is done, maybe the portion is bigger to highlight the policy of the government and planning of corporation. So it doesn't mean that we follow the agenda set by the policymaker. No, but it is the role of media to oversight. Is the right policy correct? Is it implemented, or is it only one for 2 years? And that's something that, well, at least what I do, we are, safeguarding this. And like Revo said, it should not only jargon, merely a jargon that when and then it's not being implemented. Now, in order to oversee and to remind the policymaker, then it has to be done through collaboration with researcher, NGO, and the broader community. Let's say there's an environment damage, and that's something that we need to raise, and then we submit it to the policymaker. Hey, why you make policy is then bring this impact, but for the broader community but we need to balance that by providing education to the broader community, making sure telling them not to use fossil energy or use environmental friendly powered electricity. So Tenny, now from my side personally, so if we see deeper in Indonesia, there are many NGO or CSO or university researcher that conduct researcher on this topic about climate change, clean energy. Like mentioned by Daisy earlier, some of us find difficulties to deliver the message in a simple language, which journalists or media is very expert in doing this because journalists and media understand how to use simple language, daily language. So it will be better in the future. There should be a collaboration, as mentioned earlier, collaboration between media and also researcher with NGO or with research center. So let us work together to campaign climate change and clean energy, and there will be space for researcher, for CSO or NGO in the same space, and our narrative is compared with the narrative developed by the government. So in the future, that's what we hope to have. Thank you so much. And let's move to Desi. And the same, we need to localize the climate change issue. I myself, our current project is focusing on climate justice. Previously, we have a discussion climate justice or just or climate term again refer to Western. So often when I interview to Indonesian people, do we have a local wisdom that having the same meaning? We actually have, but it's never been explored. So there are new etymology from the eastern region. So I call it global south, like countries like Indonesia. That's number one. And number two, I would like to see more inclusivity. In other words, when we talk about energy transition and climate change, we not only talk about certain groups or take narrative only from certain groups, but we can approach them who are affected the most by this climate change. So I think that will be from my side. Inclusivity is very crucial when we talk about climate change. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Dusty. So that concludes our session today. So on behalf of the organizer committee, I would like to thank Yura, Revo, Apo, Teni, and Desi. And also to all of our participants for taking the time to join the discussion this evening. Before we officially close this session, I would like to invite participants to face the camera to have a group photo in 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your active participation. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Until we meet again in the next IESR case program. Thank you so much.